We do have policy and we do have proposals on this. I just wanted to kind of respond, though, not with caution, but I think we have to go into this with awareness. I remember in the 1980s when we had various incentives. There was the arts and the MERBs, and I remember in Vancouver we actually ended up demolishing some affordable housing based on some of these tax incentives, and so it kind of had a counter indication, which was very problematic. So I think how one does this is very important. I've already suggested that one of the things that we are very interested to do is to introduce legislation that would allow exemption from the GST, the HST, based on a policy of encouraging the development of affordable housing. And we also are very interested to improve the way the home buyer plan works, that would allow people to increase their withdrawal based on inflation. And I think probably very significantly is this idea, and it did come from the Real Estate Board, to provide an incentive that would allow landlords to defer their capital gains tax if they were purchasing or were in ownership of low-cost residential rental property. So these are all ideas that we've brought forward. I'm sure that there are other ideas. So I think I can say very clearly for the NDP, we believe that incentives is part of the solution for what we need to see for the housing issues before us in Metro Vancouver and across the country. And again, I think we need the process to sit down and actually develop that, cost them out, and make sure that they actually do produce the result that we want, and we don't see results from the past repeated.
I think the idea of capital gains deferral if you reinvest is a very important one to think about. I think we need to sit down and look at how it will work, because I think I agree with Libby. The MERBs tended to be a huge scam in many ways, and it didn't really work. What we want to do is to stimulate construction of new affordable rental and affordable housing, and we need to look at how we can do that. I mean, the RSP is one where if you want to buy a new home and you can tap out your RSP to do so. We need to look at that in about 10 years and see what the downside of that was. But I think it sounds like a good proposal at the time. But 10 years from now, is that going to impact on family savings? I don't know. But we need to try some of these things and make sure we evaluate them as we go along. I mean, you know, the other one that I think we talk about is accelerating depreciation. And of course, offsetting losses that you do from other income. Those are important things we can look at as tax incentives as we move forward. But we need to assess them, we need to talk with our partners about them, and we need to see how they feel they will work. There are some places in which we have had best practices. Let's look at best practices. Let us not reinvent the wheel in everything that we do. We know that some provinces have some really good incentives that have worked. We need to look at how we reuse land in many instances. And so there are many things that we can do as we want to stimulate, not simply and only tax incentives. The federal government has land in many areas. And if you look at co-op housing right now, co-op housing was built in the 60s, 70s. They paid off their mortgages, but they're low-density housing. They're usually 3-story buildings sitting on large parklands like in Burnaby here. How do we densify that? What does the CMHC can do to help to stimulate that kind of densification? So there's a lot of solutions that have come about. People have talked about this enough. Let's actually sit down and put some plans into action, set some clear goals, and use an evaluation process to see if we're getting where we want to go and what works and doesn't.
Thank you, Doug.
If I can just comment first on that point that Hetty just raised around what CMHC can do around the building, the new building. Well, Hetty, CMHC mandate was changed under a Liberal government that you were part of in the 1990s. I mean, it no longer has the mandate for investing in the building of new non-market housing. So, to answer your question, though, to the point, the Green Party does believe in a mix of the public and the private sector in the delivery of affordable new housing. And we think that the Tax Act should be changed. That Tax Act is one way that actually was effective when we had a tax act that rewarded investors to build and maintain. It worked. It wasn't that it didn't work. It actually worked. And why it was changed, I have no idea, but it's certainly one thing I would do as a new MP from Vancouver Centre would be approach whoever is in government and see, is it not possible to change that tax act again? We're talking about enticing investment. This is a really good part of the private sector policy that we need to move forward with. So what we would advocate for is, again, the breaks in terms of investment, the deduction of capital gains from not just rental income, but from all income. Because that's, I've heard from investors, a big problem, not being able to write it off against all income if they're not full-time with huge amounts of money coming from rental income. Allowing, with restrictions, the rollover of capital gains tax on the sale of the property. By restrictions, I mean the person should be reinvesting in stock of the same quality, so affordable housing or affordable rental housing, that it has to be that same level of housing in terms of the recommitment of the funds. And eliminating capital gains tax. Well, there's other ways we could eliminate capital gains tax, and one of them certainly is also on the provision.
Thank you very much,
property.
Adrian.
Thank you.
Should British Columbians decide not to maintain the HST and to go back to the PST, this could be part of a new discussion, new dialogue within the province of British Columbia of what exemptions we may or may not have with our sales tax going forward with regard to incentives for social housing. It's an important consideration, and I think an important rule. Adrian took a shot at Hetty there, and it's legit. I'm not criticizing the shot; it's fine. But one thing that is important in defense of Hetty, though, is that with regard to real estate, especially here in the Lower Mainland, is that policies sometimes change. You can sit here in 2011 and say, well, back in 2003 when the Liberals made the change, now that we have hindsight, maybe that shouldn't have happened. That's an easy thing to do. The point is taken, though, that maybe that's something that should be reconsidered. But I can tell you, I used to be the parliamentary secretary for the CMHC, so I do know a little bit about this stuff, that with regard to real estate, that policies can't be set in stone. They have to be flexible. We've seen real disparities across the country in terms of what are the best policies with regard to housing, and the government has to be flexible with these things. One example, in our economic action plan, we had the home renovation tax credit. Widely hailed, it was very popular, heavily subscribed and used by Canadian taxpayers to renovate their homes, because at that point, which is at the nadir of the recession, we wanted people to have a tax incentive to invest in their homes, which everybody wants to do at a time of recession, as people were thinking about maybe selling their homes because they couldn't sustain their mortgage payments because maybe people lost their jobs. So we managed to do a great deal of productivity, get rid of the black market in those who are doing home renovations, and encourage people's incentives. Now, should a home renovation tax credit be in place all the time? No, because it's very expensive, but at times tax policy has to adjust to the economic and social realities, and actually I think that's what Hetty and Adrian and Libby and I would all agree with, and that's, I think, an important part of the debate is let's use tax policy going forward effectively.